This is The Metro on WDET. I'm Tia Graham. The Michigan Department of Natural Resources has new regulations for deer hunters starting this year, and a big one coming up in 2027. Hunters will be able to use high-powered rifles anywhere in the state. Previously, southern Michigan was limited to muzzleloaders and other rifles that don't have as far of a range. And another, coming up in 2027, is being called the one-buck rule. Deer hunters will only be able to take one antlered deer per hunting season. The rule changes are reigniting long-standing tensions between hunters and the DNR, where policy and trust are at odds. The Metro's Owen Armentrout has the story. He starts with Kevin Vistisen, host of the Deer Hunter podcast, asking what his initial reaction was to the news of the one-buck rule being put into place.
You know, my initial reaction when it was proposed was, is it going to be a loss of opportunity? I guess a lot of what went through my head is, could the landscape provide, 2 bucks and still have high quality deer numbers, deer herd health? I understand that the state wants more does and more antlerless deer taken, but I'm not convinced that this rule change and regulation is going to move that, even a couple percent.
For the DNR's new policy to achieve its goal of decreasing the overall deer population, some hunters will have to change their entire mindset about hunting. Michigan DNR's deer specialist Brent Rudolph says there are a number of factors at play.
We want to have enough deer and the kind of deer around that hunters will enjoy pursuing them. Hunting is an important recreational activity in the state. It's important for our economy. It's a great tradition for a lot of people in Michigan. But we want to also minimize some of the negative consequences. And several of those big ones are crop damage, our deer vehicle collisions, impacts they can have on native vegetation, and then disease as well. And that's a big one. We have a couple of diseases of concern in Michigan, one of which, bovine tuberculosis can also infect people and livestock. And so that's certainly a concern. The other thing we're contending with is our hunter numbers are declining. And it's not just in Michigan, it's nearly everywhere. We've lost about a third of our hunters over about 30 years. And so when we look at trying to, sustain hunting traditions and keep people active and engaged in hunting, and so doing some things to maybe reduce the pressure on bucks, have a few more older bucks out there that lots of hunters prefer, but especially trying to get more hunters just to see taking an antlerless deer as a viable alternative, as a good thing they can do. We're really trying to look at regulations that'll provide at least that nudge in that direction.
And a nudge might just be enough for some hunters who know from experience that there are too many does and not enough bucks. Jeremy Poloski hunts in the Thumb region of the state.
It is going to help with more does being harvested, which is a good thing because the doe to buck ratio is insane. I'd say I see 5 does to every 1 buck at least, if not more.
Brett Kale hunts near Harbor Beach, Michigan, and he's also optimistic about the one-buck rule improving the quality of deer hunting here in the state.
I think it's going to help. Most other states that have better quality deer, bigger bucks than we do on average, they only shoot 1 buck, and they grow bigger bucks than we do. So I think 1 buck should make a lot of guys think about, what if I squeeze the trigger, let this arrow fly right now, I'm done shooting an antlered deer for the year.
But not everyone agrees that the quality of deer hunting needs to improve. A lot of that depends on where you hunt and how you hunt. Kevin Vistisen talks to Michigan deer hunters for a living and says new rules tend to rile up hunters.
As a deer hunter, I'd rather we have too many deer than the alternative where, hey, there's no deer on the landscape, and that is a real bummer. The UP can speak to that. Ask the guys in the UP how they feel, about there not being deer around, and they'll tell you. So as a resident of the Lower Peninsula, I'm very happy with the numbers and the quality of the herd. Like my hunting in the past handful of years has just been amazing. Really, I couldn't ask for more.
And you bring up a good point about the Upper Peninsula because, at the end of the day, they have a lower population of bucks than the Lower Peninsula, and they chose to keep the same regulations.
Well, that's based off of who you talk to, because those guys are almost ready for a civil war up there based off of what side of the line you fall on for deer management. There's a populace that wanted a removal of a tag, and there's a percentage of the populace that was very much against it. And I don't know what those percentages are, but I could tell you that there is some difference in opinion between UP residents on how that can be done. And if you want to get a Uper worked up, go start talking to them about deer hunting regulation changes. That you might not make it out alive.
So I want to pivot to another regulation that's making its way through Michigan's legislature, and that's baiting. There's been a lot of hot-button discussion on its use, and I'm interested in hearing how you feel about it and if you see any relation with the one-buck rule.
I like bait for hunting over it and maybe for point of entry. So I am a little bit torn on it, but I think in the short term it could make some people happy. But I think ultimately as a state, we need to culturally move away from hunting over bait. I think it's one of the main reasons why a lot of guys are upset with the quality of deer hunting in the state is because they have leaned on bait as a crutch. I mean, it is very effective. It's hard to argue that it might be the most effective way to kill deer. So I'll give them that. But I will say also, if that's the only strategy you ever learn and you spend decades and you don't learn or do any other methods and ways to learn to hunt, and then you have to, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. It took me a decade to fully graduate out of like using bait to now not using bait at all. I firmly believe the way that I hunt, bait is a big disadvantage because you're essentially putting up a big red flag to tell all the deer, hey, somebody's been in here. Yeah, you might not be seeing them because of the effectiveness of your strategy. The guys that I kind of hang out with and spend a lot of time deer hunting with, they kill pretty nice deer pretty consistently. And I don't think anybody's doing it over bait, at this point.
So since you mentioned point of entry, I want to transition from the one-buck rule to the elimination of the limited firearms zone. A little over a decade ago, the shotgun zone was changed to the limited firearms zone to include straight wall cartridges. But now, as an accompanying change to the one-buck rule, you can use any legal high-powered rifle you like. That being said, some people have voiced concerns about safety. How do you feel about the elimination of the limited firearms zone?
I was shocked, semi-alarmed, and very grateful that I no longer hunt in southern Michigan. If I'm going to be honest, my first initial thought was, it seems unnecessary. Let's just start there. The advancements in the firearms that are available right now to hunt deer in those landscapes, very few situations where you can't get something to work. Do we need high-powered rifles, to be taking 75 to 150-yard shots? I understand guys that have big firearms and are going to reach out and touch deer across fields. Maybe that'll get more does killed, Maybe now that you can use a 6.5 Creedmoor down in Monroe County and you could shoot over to three fields over, maybe people will kill more deer because of that. Will there be more accidents? I don't know. Really, honestly, Hunter, if I was going to trust one group of people in the entire world to proceed with caution and be responsible, it's hunters.
It should be noted this is not the first time firearm regulations have changed for hunters in this state. In recent years, state regulations expanded to allow rifles with straight wall cartridges, and Michigan DNR deer specialist Brent Rudolph says that since then, the data shows no connection between the number of safety incidents and the kind of firearms used while hunting.
Our law enforcement division then did a review, saw that, with the addition of some of those straight wall cartridges have a much farther range and reach than what other restrictions had in the past. And over the 13 some years of that history, with looking before and then after that change had been made, the vast majority of incidents, safety incidents, casualties and other things did not involve
that expansion to those rifles. Then even in the northern region where rifles have been allowed, it's a mix of handguns and shotguns and muzzleloaders that are also responsible for a number of the incidents. So there's no real evidence showing that those types of firearms had a much higher rate of safety concerns or incidents or issues.
But whether it's baiting, firearm regulations, or the $1 rule, if you talk to enough hunters, you're bound to run into one core issue. Many just don't trust the Department of Natural Resources or the NRC, the body that actually approves the regulations recommended by the DNR. I asked Kevin Vistison why that is and how that mistrust can be remedied.
A lot of people in this country are just mentally wounded by being lied to by establishments for, decades. And does that trickle down into state level policy? Yeah, certainly, and, the way the NRC and the DNR is set up, the DNR gives the NRC recommendation and the NRC changes, can make changes and then ultimately votes on and positions the rules and regulations change. I don't know if there's a better way that can be done. There's some guys that really do understand in detail how all that system works, and, they're upset with the way that it works. And then there's a lot of people that are just generally upset that have really no clue, what the role of the NRC is, what the role of the DNR is. So my point is, a lot of what you see on social media is somewhat amplified versus what the reality is. If you go to a deer camp in Michigan, generally in the fall, everybody's having a great time. And you might have a camp where it's full of guys that have a variance of opinion, but it's not fisticuffs around the campfire every night. Everybody's hanging out, having a good time. There might be a healthy debate. So the stuff you see on social media is a little bit of a manipulated viewpoint. It's just a lot different out there in reality than it is online.
The DNR's Brent Rudolph has an idea for turning down the temperature and discontent.
I think one of the ways we can hopefully reduce controversy is by trying to have less frequent changes. Our department's really been looking towards trying to have our deer regulations changes be on kind of 3-year packages. So in between years, then after we make the changes, let's take really the time to evaluate the outcome. And the outcome from a biological standpoint, but also give people a few years under stable regulations to give their viewpoints. Sometimes a change you think is going to be really disastrous isn't that big of a deal. Sometimes once you've had a chance to experience it, you might think differently. Again, like it more or like it worse than you thought. But give some stability, give some more time for evaluation. And then in between, have more open dialogue, not about, what's going to happen next month and the regulations have to change and then the seasons follow right away, but say over the next couple of years, what else should we be looking at, and build a more sustained kind of dialogue with the hunting community around these packages that can be made and then sustained over a couple of years at a time.
The $1 rule goes into effect in 2027, and hunters can use high-powered rifles anywhere in the state starting opening day of gun season this fall. Whether or not the rule changes will lead to bigger bucks and less deer will take time and patience. 2 things hunters know well. That'll do it for The Metro. The Metro is hosted by Robin Vincent and me, Tia Graham. It's produced by Sam Corey and Alex McLennan. Our engineer is Jose Yanis, and our senior producer is David Lyons. You can stay up to date on all the conversations we have on the Metro podcast feed. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. The Metro is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. And this is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. You all have a great day.